Hey everybody. Often when talking about the topic of politics in video games, the discourse gets flooded by nonsensical garbage, either by a genuine misunderstanding of what people are actually talking about and referring to, or a disingenuous attempt at reframing the topic or covering up the actual issues that it represents. In the next few videos, I will be talking about different items surrounding this topic, dividing each of them for their own video so that I can try to do so in detail without it resulting in one massive boring video. So let's get started on this one, going over the main argument that gets brought up several times when discussing the matter, a type of comment that is even present in some of my own comment sections across some videos, which states that all art is political. All video games are inherently political because they were created by people who have their own worldviews, and so people like myself and others who speak against the poisoning of the medium through political ideologies are just mad because the politics in the games are not reflective of our own personal views, and if they were, then we would not be complaining at all. This argument is total nonsense, of course, but there's a few different parts to it, one of which has to do with personal interpretations of the content in a video game. This is something that I will flesh out in more detail in a future video within this series, for lack of a better word, but we're gonna touch on it right now because it's necessary for context. Take, for example, Kingdom Come Deliverance. It's a game that strives to portray the region of Bohemia in medieval times in an accurate manner. This region is more or less where the Czech Republic is now, so all the characters that we come across are white, and there is a quote-unquote obvious lack of diversity. A normal person will see that and be unbothered by it even if it doesn't personally represent them. Like, I play this game and I take absolutely no issue with playing as Henry and being surrounded by a bunch of white people. I don't need to be personally represented to enjoy the story and the setting that the devs worked hard on, and it also doesn't hurt my fifis that the game is fleshing out their culture and their history instead of my own. I do not see this as political, I see this as normal. The game is set where it is set in, I purchased the game fully knowing that, therefore I have no right to complain about it. If I am not interested in that culture, in that historic setting, etc., then I would not purchase the game. It is as simple as that. Not only is it creative freedom, but it's also something that just straight up makes sense. One thing that art gets totally ruined by politics in is the diminishment of certain values, such as accurate representations of a setting, be that in how characters look, or the language used, or the way that people treat each other, etc. Those are things that add to the immersion of a video game, no matter what setting it is in. If I was playing a similar game set in Africa, for example Assassin's Creed Origins, which is specifically set in Egypt, then I would not want to see a bunch of white Central Europeans walking around either. I would want to see an overwhelming majority of Egyptian people, which is precisely what we got, and there were no people complaining about it at all. And the only people who were not native to that setting were because of a loyalty to that immersion. So again, in Origins we can see Roman and Greek people, as well in some regions such as the great city of Alexandria and the Fayum region where Egyptians and Greeks lived together and even shared a common god, which was Serapis. And then in the most northern regions of the map, such as Cyrenaica and Marmarica, we can find Romans. And the exact same thing goes for Asian settings, for example, in Japan, Ghost of Tsushima. What do people want to see? People want to see Japanese people. And any other people that are not Japanese have to make sense within that setting, such as the Mongolians. This is the way that it should be, no matter the setting, and it is a consensus among gamers. All that the vast majority of people really want is authenticity and sense in their settings, no matter if it is fantasy or historical fiction, no matter if it is set in Europe, America, Africa, Asia, Middle Earth, or the fucking moon. And this has been proven over years of examples such as these being things that people did not have an issue with. Some idiot's personal interpretation that this is racist is just wrong, pure and simple. And it's also very selective and hypocritical because nobody was looking at Assassin's Creed Origins or Ghost of Tsushima or Assassin's Creed Mirage or any of these other settings and going, oh, where's the diversity? Just like there weren't no chuds going, where's the white people? Now where's them white people over here on this Assassin's Creed Oregano? Y'all building them pyramids without a pickup truck? Mistake. Should've put in some white people over here with some pickup trucks. They'd get those goddamn pyramids built in no time. This is and always has been a non-issue that was made an issue by SJWs purposely looking for things to find problems in, things to be offended in, or false causes to boost their careers, as they do now by capitalizing off of this nonsense in DEI departments inside of studios or DEI consulting companies. The very existence of these departments and companies is rooted in politics. The way they earn their paychecks is by literally politicizing issues within the industry and injecting their agenda into studio structures and the very games that they produce. This is monetary and will never go away because the very existence of their jobs hinge on making up bullshit narratives and creating problems to push more and more activism into the gaming space. It's kinda like a company having a surplus, like that Office meme.
We have a surplus.
Okay.
We have to spend that by the end of the day or it will be deducted from next year's budget.
Why don't you explain this to me like I'm 5?
Rather than letting corporates see that they have a surplus, which would be deducted from next year's budget, they would rather make up something to spend that money on so that next year's budget is not penalized. Similarly with these companies, there will never be a point at which they don't need to shove their political garbage into video games, because that would be the day that they would admit that their job is obsolete and that the department can be closed, or the consultant company is not necessary anymore. So if it's up to them, the envelope will just keep getting constantly pushed and pushed and pushed with stupider and even more unhinged ideals, restrictions, quotas, initiatives, and censorship each and every new year. Authenticity adds to immersion. The absence of authenticity is not ideal, however, it is still preferable to what politics do in these kinds of settings via activists in the aforementioned positions, deeming authenticity to be racist or sexist or whatever else, and then doing the opposite of authenticity, which directly breaks immersion. An example of authenticity being what was done with Kingdom Come Deliverance, of course, not just in the depiction of the people of the region of Bohemia, but also in the depiction of Christianity and women within that setting. An absence of authenticity would be, for example, reducing the presentation of Christianity in that setting. If you haven't played the game yet, it's a very present thing. People greet each other with lines such as "God be with you." They do the whole Christian cross thing with their hands, you know, the blessing. They wear crosses, they go to church, the very church itself, Jesus and God are often referenced, so on and so forth. It is what it is. It's medieval Europe, arguably the height of Christianity. Even though I am not personally like a very religious person or anything along those lines, this does not bother me in the least, and it shouldn't, because it is the same that we see in, for example, other video games, again like Assassin's Creed Origins or Assassin's Creed Odyssey, with so many references to ancient Egyptian and ancient Greek theology, including all manner of statues and temples, etc., all across the setting. Another example of absence of authenticity would be to put up women in more prominent roles, like for example having them prominently owning land, owning businesses, maybe even having them as blacksmiths that you can visit and have your swords or your armors worked on. It's not like you can't have this kind of thing happen in other settings, like for example in Witcher 3 and in Skyrim there are female blacksmiths, and that doesn't bother me either, but if you're trying to be authentic with a medieval European setting that's trying to be historically accurate, then it obviously would not make sense to see that. And now the opposite of authenticity is what these companies like Sweet Baby Inc. and other types of activists within the industry like to do, where they actively go against what they know to be authentic. In other words, they like to misrepresent reality and things that people know to be true. They like to go against what is usual, to try and rewrite history and aspects of reality in accordance to their identity politics. So what they would do would be, for example, injecting diversity quotas, turning the setting into a multicultural melting pot of races and cultures akin to downtown LA, an openly LGBT character here and there, possibly a prominent one in a high position and a public position, because of course, and placing women in masculine positions of power, including a possible playable character to take on the main story just as Henry does, becoming a squire and an excellent swordsman, etc. Emphasis on the masculine part, because it's not like Kingdom Come Deliverance doesn't have women in respectable positions and in positions of power. Just off the top of my head, we have Lady Stephanie, for example, very influential, very loved, and in a very high position. Also, Teresa, who despite being simply a millmaid, is shown to be a very brave, resourceful, and loyal character. She is the primary love interest in the game for a reason. She is by all effects and purposes a good woman. The problem is that none of these things are of interest to activists who just want to gaslight everyone and especially themselves when it comes to this stuff such as gender roles, hierarchies, and the very simple concept of finding a sense of peace, purpose, and love in a simple life that falls within these parameters, even when it's a fucking video game, trying to portray a setting realistically. Basically, what's next? Stop teaching history because it involves outdated moral standards? Oh, get the I'll never forget how games media and a bunch of SJW morons attacked Kingdom Come Deliverance right out of the gate back in 2018 because of a moment in the opening scene where Henry's father lovingly taps his wife's backside after giving her a good morning hug and telling her to go get Henry out of bed because they had a sword to finish. These people are so retarded that they called this display of perfectly normal and healthy affection to be misogynistic and patriarchal. These people almost had a fucking heart attack. Oh my god, he did not just do that. Like, oh my god, you can't just do that. You can't just touch her like that. She did not consent. I was here, I was looking at it. She did not consent. And why is she the one having to go get the boy out of bed? Why is she the one having to go do these things? Why can't she be wearing the blacksmith apron instead? Why can't she be the one making the sword? It's 2018. It's 2018. Women can make swords too.
You can't do it. It's disgusting.
This is a disgusting display of heteronormativity and patriarchy. A personal interpretation of politics does not equate to the actual presence of political or ideological intent for propaganda, period. This point will further be fleshed out in a future video, like I said before, with more practical examples of this stuff, including some aimed at some anti-woke people as well, who can also fall victim to the fallacy of deeming something normal as political, such as the presence of black characters, female protagonists, or gay romance options. A lot of this stuff is highly dependent on the setting and in the way that these matters are handled within the contents of the game. While I agree that we are currently undergoing a very complicated time in the industry where a lot of companies are following the exact same pattern with these ridiculous decisions and delivering ideologically compromised games, we also have to take care to not become overly cynical and jumping at shadows while potentially disregarding games that are actually innocent of this kind of stuff. The saying that all art is political is a big batch of bullshit. It's a nonsensical argument to try and justify the utter slaughter of entertainment that is going on right now across games, movies, shows, comic books, etc. And this argument is usually coupled together with examples of politically themed storylines or scenes from older games such as Metal Gear Solid, BioShock, Deus Ex, Call of Duty, Resident Evil, Half-Life 2, Fallout, etc. This is a totally nonsensical and disingenuous interpretation of what this element is and of what those games represented as well. Those games were pure fiction, and the political themes in them were strictly tied to their fictional setting and stories. They were in-universe politics, part of the plot, lore, and world building of those games. There is a big difference between political themes as a tool for writing enticing complex stories and politics using video games as a tool for propagandization. The difference is indeed so massive that I am convinced that anyone who claims not to be able to see it is just lying. When people say that they don't want politics in their games, they don't mean that they want their games to be devoid of the depth that the concept of in-universe political themes brings to storytelling and world building. This was never the issue, and that's why bringing up these games as examples just doesn't work. People mean that they don't want real-life politics tied to real-life contemporary issues to influence their game. They don't want ideological propaganda to be injected awkwardly into their games and ruin the immersion inside. The big issue here is that these things being injected into the video games are becoming extremely intrusive. They are part of hotly debated and divisive real-life problems, and they are being aggressively shoved into the games in the form of messaging, moral grandstanding, and lecturing towards its players. This brings real-life baggage to what is meant to be a piece of entertainment built for escapism. Video games like Metal Gear Solid, Call of Duty, Deus Ex, Fallout, etc., with stories that included shadowy government organizations, terrorism, conspiracies, and war, were not there to lecture players. They were there as rich foundations for storytelling, beautifully woven into the world building and plot by talented writers whose intent was to create an interesting, complex, living setting for players to immerse themselves in. The intent of activists within these internal DEI departments and consultant companies are the exact fucking opposite. They don't want their players to be immersed in a fictional world, having fun, because fun is privileged. They want to yank the player out of these worlds and slap them across the face with political messaging geared towards what they should be accepting of, what they should be more considerate of, what the right view of a thing should be. This is actually so overt that these activists can't even keep it in game anymore. They build their entire personalities around it, and they preach it on social media. They pick fights with people online over it, and they happily insult their player bases, or actually their potential player bases, based on if they have different views or if they don't even express any views at all and simply want the game to be fun and immersive. Case in point, Matt Hansen from Avowed gladly telling people that his work has the intention to turn away people who disagree with him politically. And when these people are this fucking sick in the head, that makes for an extremely small sample size. So here's just a random person minding their own business, just wanting to play a game, getting shat on by Matt Hansen because even neutrality itself is a problem to them. The basic idea of simply doing their jobs as game developers is inconceivable to them. As a player, you're either all in on the activism or you can go fuck yourself because the game is not for you. Intent is extremely important when it comes to judging whether or not a game is politically compromised. For example, why is it that Baldur's Gate 3, a game with gay characters, pronoun selection, etc. in its character creator, is so successful and enjoyed? Well, it's simple, because the intent from the developers wasn't to moralize on players and force an ideology on them. You could say that Baldur's Gate 3 is a great example of what actual inclusion looks like, because unlike Dragon Age Veilguard, for example, it wasn't trying to replace conventional character design, aka attractive male and female characters, with unconventional and attractive character design, and it wasn't trying to parse many of its game concepts through an ideological filter that ended up doing all manner of damage to Dragon Age Veilguard. I cover precisely what these are in my videos reviewing the game. Feel free to check them out for details on what exactly these were and how exactly they worked. In Baldur's Gate 3, the intent was to make a great RPG that would offer its players a shit ton of options, player freedom is number one, and the setting and story was not compromised. At no point past the character creation menu where the they/them pronouns are present is your immersion ever broken like it is in Veilguard and some other games by putting on a stupid ass scene about a character coming out as non-binary in these exact modern words. Nor does it ever take 10 minutes to make a cringy ass misgendering scene that is followed by an entire lesson on how to grovel on the ground for forgiveness to whoever the fuck a person just misgendered. At the end of the day, the number one focus for Baldur's Gate 3 was to make a good ass game, and then by the end of it add inclusion elements to it that don't break immersion and that don't sacrifice player freedom or the consistency and fun of the setting because of being fucking terrified of offending someone or sending the wrong message to their player base. And it ended up being successful because so long as activists don't enshroud the company and start pushing envelopes to make the studio commit to retarded causes that have nothing to do with what the entertainment medium of gaming is about, then it's an acceptable compromise since it doesn't infringe on the creative process of the games or on its players. All of this and the example of Assassin's Creed Origins in the last point are evidence that this has nothing to do with partisanship. It's not a political matter. It's the rejection of all of it, no matter the alignment of the messaging. Even if it switched from left to right, it would still be bad because it intrudes in the experience. When people say that all games are political and have always been, all that they're saying is that there's no piece of entertainment that they cannot politicize and use to their advantage in their own agendas, be that by propping them up as as a piece of media that includes propaganda that they approve of, or by targeting them as pieces of media that include propaganda that is dangerous and problematic. And there is no better recent example of this garbage than last year's situation with Black Myth Wukong, where these people took it so far in their desperation that they politicized a fucking monkey game from Chinese mythology as being a toxic right-wing piece of propaganda by simply refusing to work with Sweet Baby Inc. and not doing the retarded shit that many AAA Western studios do with applying diversity quotas in the design of their characters, even when it wouldn't make any goddamn sense in the first place, since it's a game mostly packed with animal-looking characters. And also, when it is human-looking characters, they were Chinese, so doesn't it make it diverse already? Why is a full Chinese game not considered diverse? Someone please explain that to me. It doesn't matter if it's Black Myth Wukong, Stellar Blade, Minecraft, Toy Story, Conker's Bad Fur Day, or just a fucking blank screen of Pong. People obsessed with gender, race, and sexuality and other similar identity politics and victim mentality bullshit will take it and find a way to politicize it, and if you call them out on how stupid it sounds, they'll call you bigoted and privileged for it, to shut down all discourse around it. It's gotten to the point where those words don't even mean anything anymore. In-universe politics are really just normal elements for storytelling, kinda like magic for fantasy, or science for science fiction, or religion for both. You can use them any way that you want to, and you can take it as far as you want. The success of the implementation comes down to how talented the writer is. I'm not saying that it's impossible to impart political meaning and moral lessons in the stories that a person is telling. It's totally possible that this could even happen by accident, because each person's interpretations of events is going to be unpredictable and wholly dependent on that person's personal experiences. The point at the end of the day is that you have to be able to separate reality from fiction, and at that point you have to also be able to present valuable arguments as to why it is that what you're playing is political or carrying political undertones, and those arguments have to stand up to scrutiny based on what's in the actual product or surrounding the product. Case in point, the trailer for Witcher 4 has raised some concerns for some people, mainly because of CD Projekt Red's change in behavior, the corporatization of their company, and their open commitment to DEI and ESG, which is all perfectly laid out on their website and on a video that they made. You can go there and read it yourselves and watch the video on their channel, is what causes the concerns at the side of some elements in their content. And another thing that we must separate, and I kinda touched on this before but I'm going to reinforce it here, is the significant difference between moral lessons and political concepts that are made to bring people together rather than apart. Believe it or not, but when people are trying to impart some deeper meanings with their games or their shows or their movies or books, whatever, they're going to use lessons that are widely relatable and acceptable because, duh, number one, they want to sell their fucking piece of media to as many people as possible, and number two, they want people to have fun and walk away happy with their game or, their product. And as a bonus, if it can bring people together from across the world, then even better. And this is present in all sorts of media, like for example Lord of the Rings, a fantastic piece of fiction that entertains and inspires, a set of characters in a story meant to give people hope and hold up wonderful values such as love and friendship and seeing the good in the world. Far-left retards are even able to grab this very simple concept of a fight between good and evil and try to humanize evil by making the orcs seem likable or making the orcs seem like they have babies and families and all of this shit like they did in Rings of Power. Like, why are you doing this? What is the point of doing this? You're out of your fucking minds. Or look at Dragon Ball, for example. The fame of this anime is massive, and the kinds of things that people can draw from it are different too. There's people inspired by Goku's personality and perseverance. There's people who praise Vegeta's pride and stoicism. There's also certainly something to be taken away in regards to friendship, seeing the good in people, and also pure and simple self-improvement. Some people like to equate this as, oh, see, there's moral, ethic, and political lessons in media. There's always been. As if stuff that is meant to appeal to people's humanity and bring them together is at all equal to the toxic, divisive, narcissism-charged garbage that is pumped into the fucking entertainment media today. We literally just got done touching on how despicably disrespectful and hateful these activists in the medium are. Is this kind of shitty environment being bred by these disgusting ideologies that not only infect the content a studio makes but also the studios themselves? themselves, their literal workforce, their culture, their intentions, etc., supposed to be defensible? This disgusting, divisive garbage is what is supposed to be comparable to older stories that inspired goodness? Are these people out of their fucking minds?
Yes, yes.
And that's not to touch on the crazier side of this politicization nonsense. Like for example, in 2023, what happened with Hogwarts Legacy, aside from the whole transgender and J.K. Rowling thing, another reason why this game was supposedly only played by alt-right chud pieces of garbage was because the game was anti-Semitic apparently, making the goblins to be Jews. And the reasons that these weird fucking people gave for this was that they were short, had big noses, and loved gold. So much so that they ran Gringotts Bank. This is an insane delusion, pure and simple. These people simply can't go up to anyone and make serious arguments in regards to this because of some racist or delusional bullshit that they cooked up in their own minds. If they, as individuals, see some representation of a real-life race or people reflected in some weird fictional creature race like the goblins in Harry Potter, or the orcs, or the elves in Lord of the Rings, or whatever else, then that's their personal problem. That's their own little racist minds. It's very similar to what happens whenever discussing the uglification or defeminization of female characters in video games. Like, you can't even bring up the issue, you can even bring up, for example, a screenshot of Kay Vess in comparison to her actual actress, without these people going straight to sexualization and talking about masturbation and shit like that, when that was not the issue at all. The degree with which they needed to be fucked in the head to think that, or to think that the goblins are Jews because of this superficial nonsense, while trying to simultaneously present themselves as progressive people who stand for tolerance and kindness and all of this other virtue signaling nonsense, was insane, as was their attacks on streamers and other random people who were merely trying to enjoy Hogwarts Legacy. They went as far as to have websites dedicated to pasting links of Hogwarts Legacy streamers for them to rush over to en masse to harass the streamers. It is actually insane the amount of damage that shit like this has done to the political left. This kind of behavior has managed to bring more people to the center or even to the right than the fucking YouTube channels or quote-unquote influencers that they demonize every goddamn day, like Asmongold, Grums, Smash JT, Endymion, Critical Drinker, Geeks and Gamers, Nerdrotic, etc. I felt the way that I feel right now because of all of this garbage happening all around me for years, leaving me feeling disgusted of the behavior of my peers. I didn't watch or even know any of these channels or people at that time. In the end, you can't say that all art or all video games are political as a justification for what's going on in the industry right now. It's just incompatible even if the statement was accurate, which it absolutely isn't. That's actually a really stupid and vapid statement to make. I know it sounds smart, refined and intelligent, almost like if it was said by a modern intellectual of sorts, cracking the secret hipster code, but it's just retarded, my dudes. And using examples like those aforementioned games just makes people who say it expose themselves as tourists who never played any of those games, as people who don't care about this medium at all, whose sole priorities are tied to their obsession with politics, and also as fucking idiots who can't tell the difference between using the apolitical concept of politics as a writing, storytelling or world-building mechanism for a fictional universe such as magic, science, religion, etc., and the purposes of divisive propagandization, because those just account for in-universe political themes which are there to serve the fiction, to serve the art, rather than doing the opposite of usurping the art in service of a political ideology. People are free to draw whatever interpretations they want, so long as they can back them up with facts and reason, and many fictional stories even like to try and reach people with some relatable positive lessons of sorts, meant to inspire, motivate, or to simply be reflected on, which is the complete opposite of the corrupted political influence injecting acidic divisive messaging meant to tear people apart, separate them into various groups and labels, and then demonize one another based off of their immutable characteristics, aka their race, their gender, sexuality, etc. This is what DEI and the ideology that pushes it does. It is malicious, and it is in no way comparable to the prior benevolent intentions. It's not progressive, it's regressive. And speaking of intentions, our personal biased misinterpretations of bullshit just to politicize it has no validity if the intentions of the creator have nothing to do with the stupid fucking batshit insane ideas that freaks cook up in their heads, such as the lack of diversity in an accurate representation of a historic medieval setting, or the creation of goblins in a fantasy setting being racism. Same thing with older games from years ago where the intention was obviously to deliver some cool-ass games with creative stories, appealing to their audiences, making some good money, and sustaining their passionate work in the creation of more games. Now that intention has shifted in the AAA industry, and the mission is to plaster their pro-DEI messaging all over their websites to make sure that everyone knows how virtuous they are, as they fill themselves with activist DEI hires rather than passionate, creative, and skilled people based on merit. These are just political intentions under the guise of progressivism, and the hilarious thing is that if it had stopped a few years ago, it could have actually been counted as a progressive endeavor that would have managed a balance with the production of good games, but the continuous push further and further away into far-left territory invited extremism, and now that progressiveness turned into poisonous regressiveness that just looks outright bad. Like, that's just it, dude. It looks bad. It exposes itself as narcissistic, hypocritical, and damaging to society every day, and it is no longer being accepted or tolerated by the masses, because why would it? It's extremely toxic, to say the least. All of this led to where we are now, directly correlating to bad quality games, which is what we'll be covering in detail in a following video as well. Bad quality games from studios that invited an ideology that is antithetical to the production of good content. Hell, it's antithetical to the very concept of a healthy creative work environment, as HR constantly fucking hangs over everyone's heads, and higher-ups and consultants impart creative restrictions and quotas that are impossible to keep up with. It's an ideology that abhors fun, that insults their own consumer base, and that keeps continuously shooting itself in the foot in the search of the elusive modern audience, while erroneously leaning on a commitment to DEI and ESG to keep paying the bills via government grants and investment benefits. Check in with Ubisoft and let me know how it's working out for them. And of course, all of this leads to players growing ever distrustful of these studios and publishers diving headfirst into these ideologies, to the point where they don't even have to release a bad game first before being untrustworthy. Just look at CD Projekt Red again. They lost players' trust with the launch of Cyberpunk 2077. They gained it back through the hard work that they did over the last few years, but now they are starting to lose it again because of their commitment to DEI and ESG and the full cold corporatization of their company, as per their websites and their own videos. Say what you will about the AAA industry as it was before this poisonous shit took over it. We had our stinkers, we had our live services, we had our Ubisofts, still finding ways to crank out the same games over and over and over again, but we didn't have a looming cloud hanging overhead infecting everything it touches with an ideology that makes games worse and then insults and demonizes their consumers. Are you a totally CEA trying to bullshit us by saying something, for example, like, oh no, it is a surprise mechanic, or in the case of Battlefront 2, trying to tell us that hundreds of hours of grinding to unlock heroes was for our own good, to give us a feeling of pride and accomplishment, but you didn't see them telling us to go fuck ourselves and not play their games. You didn't see nutcases like Matt Hansen purposefully making games to divide people, admitting it, insulting Obsidian's own fanbase, and then still somehow retaining his job, or morons like that other guy from Perfect Dark going down the same road, or the fruitcake from CD Projekt Red saying that he would like to punch his fucking player base, or this new typical retarded community manager from Compulsion Games being openly racist online and also expressing her hatred for gamers.
What are you, fucking stupid?
This stuff is inconceivable. We have literally reached a point of lunacy. Politics, these ideologies, haven't only come to screw up the quality of video games, they have very likely done irreparable damage to the gaming space, damage that will sadly be inherited by those smaller studios and indie developers that will have to now work twice as hard to prove themselves trustworthy to the gaming public, thanks to activists that are single-handedly destroying the companies that stupidly keep protecting them until the day that they won't be able to afford it anymore. But anyway, that's pretty much all that I had for today. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. If you've got any feedback on this video or any suggestions of other topics to be covered in the future videos surrounding this topic, be sure to let me know down in the comments. Stay tuned for the follow-ups on this series, for lack of a better word, and have yourselves a great day. I'll see you guys on the next one.